"I can take 50 just like you," the Alpha King said, and she walked away. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs, carrying the salt of the sea and the whispers of the past. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, as if it too mourned the kingdom that teetered on the edge of despair. From the horizon, the silhouette of the palace rose like a black crown, its spires stabbing at the clouds above. Within its cold stone walls, kings and queens ruled not just with authority, but with fear. And yet, in the midst of power and shadow, one woman's return promised to stir the still waters of destiny. Seraphine walked along the cliffside path, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders against the chill. The wind tugged at her hair, scattering strands across her face, but she did not falter. She had been exiled once, cast out for the visions she had seen, visions of blood, fire, and the heart of the Alpha King himself. Yet exile had not broken her. It had only sharpened her resolve. Every step she took toward the palace was a promise. She would face the king, she would uncover the truth, and she would demand the justice the realm had denied her. As she neared the gates, the guards stiffened at her approach. Seraphine did not carry a sword or a weapon of war, but there was a quiet power in her eyes that made them hesitate. Whispers spread through the courtyard like wildfire. "It is the exile returned," one guard murmured. "She walks among us again." Inside the throne room, the Alpha King, Valerian, sat upon his ebony throne. His presence was commanding, almost unnatural. Rumors said his power had been forged through a pact with forces beyond the mortal world. His eyes, sharp and gray, seemed to pierce through stone and shadow alike. He had heard of Seraphine's return before she even reached the gates, and though he claimed he would not be disturbed, he had risen early, pacing the marble floors like a caged predator. When Seraphine entered the hall, the courtiers fell silent. Her footsteps echoed against the cold stone, each one a heartbeat in the room. Valerian's gaze fixed on her, and for the first time in years he felt something he had not expected: tension, challenge, and recognition. She was no longer the frightened girl he remembered. She had grown into a woman who carried her exile like armor, and yet beneath it he sensed the fire of her spirit. "Seraphine," he said, his voice calm but edged with the weight of command, "you should not have returned." "I should not have been sent away," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart thudded beneath her ribs. "But I have returned because there are truths that cannot wait for your convenience, Valerian. You cannot hide behind your throne forever." The words struck him like a blade, not in body but in pride. He rose, his height and presence filling the room, his cloak flowing like shadow. "Do you think you can challenge me?" he asked, his tone both warning and intrigued. "Do you believe you can walk into this court, into my kingdom, and demand what you were denied?" Seraphine met his gaze without flinching. "I do not ask for what I was denied," she said. "I demand that the truth be seen, that the curse upon this kingdom be faced. You, above all, should understand that hiding does not protect anyone." A hush fell over the throne room. Courtiers whispered among themselves, unsure whether to be impressed or fearful. Valerian studied her, a slow smile forming at the edge of his lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but a predator's acknowledgment of a worthy adversary. "You have grown bold," he said finally. "I admire that, but boldness alone will not save you from what awaits inside these walls." Seraphine lifted her chin. "Nor will fear protect you from it." For a long moment, they simply stared at one another, two forces of will clashing silently across the space between them. Valerian's power radiated like heat from molten metal, but Seraphine's courage held firm. She had faced the void of exile, the loneliness of betrayal, and she had emerged stronger. Valerian's thoughts drifted for a moment, unbidden. He remembered the girl she had once been, full of questions and visions he could not comprehend. He remembered the night she had predicted his fall, the night that had led him to make choices he would forever regret. And now, standing before him, she was a reminder of all he had lost and all he might still gain. "You are dangerous," he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "Not because of the power you wield, but because you do not fear me." "And you are afraid," Seraphine replied softly, "afraid that I will reveal what you have hidden from even yourself." Valerian's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to shift as if responding to the tension. The servants and courtiers barely breathed, sensing the invisible current of power between the two. He could strike her, banish her again, or crush her with the weight of his crown. And yet he did nothing. Instead, he said, "I can take 50 just like you." A whisper of a threat and a challenge rolled into one, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Seraphine's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. She did not flinch. Instead, she turned, letting her cloak swirl around her as she walked toward the door. Her steps were calm, deliberate, each one a statement that she was not afraid, that she would not be bound by his power, and that she held secrets he had yet to see. As she reached the threshold, she looked back at him one last time. "Then you will have to try," she said, and with that she left the throne room, the echo of her words lingering like a promise. Outside, the wind bit sharper, and the gray clouds parted slightly to reveal the silver glow of the moon. Seraphine paused on the balcony, looking over the kingdom she had once been denied. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous. Valerian would not forgive, nor would he yield easily. Yet in the tension between them, she sensed the beginning of something far greater than either of them could yet imagine. A struggle not just for power, but for truth, for redemption, and perhaps for something even more fragile: connection. Meanwhile, within the throne room, Valerian remained still, staring at the door she had closed behind her. His fingers flexed around the arm of the throne, but no command left his lips. His mind replayed her words, her gaze, the way she had walked away unafraid. Pride warred with fascination, anger battled with curiosity, and the king who had thought himself unshakable felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. The palace seemed to hold its breath. Shadows shifted in the corners, the flames in the braziers danced higher, and the wind outside carried a strange resonance, as though echoing the silent challenge between them. Valerian muttered under his breath, almost to himself, the words both a warning and an admission. "I can take 50 just like you, and yet she walks away." The hall fell silent once more, but the weight of her presence lingered, heavy as storm clouds on the horizon. Valerian did not yet know what Seraphine would uncover, nor did he know how the truths she carried would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire kingdom. And as the moonlight washed over the black stone of the palace, the first threads of a story that would intertwine their fates began to form, delicate yet unbreakable. The wind howled again, carrying the promise of storms, of secrets long buried, and of battles yet to be fought. Somewhere deep in the heart of the castle, a fire burned quietly, and within it, the first flicker of a connection neither would yet name. The Alpha King and the Exile, two forces destined to clash, to challenge, and perhaps to change one another forever. And beyond the stone walls, the world waited, uncertain, silent, as if holding its breath for the tale that was about to unfold. The night had fallen over the kingdom like a dark velvet cloak. Moonlight spilled across the cliffs and the castle walls, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed almost alive. Seraphine moved through the outer courtyards, her boots silent on the damp stone. The exile had returned, but she was no longer the same girl who had been cast out. She carried with her knowledge, purpose, and the quiet fire of one who had faced the void and returned stronger. Her destination was the old library in the southern wing of the castle, a place few dared to enter. It was said that the walls there held secrets older than the throne itself. Ancient tomes whispered truths long buried, and the air smelled of parchment, dust, and magic that lingered even centuries later. Here, Seraphine hoped to uncover what had bound Valerian's power, the curse that made him untouchable and feared, yet restless and haunted. The doors of the library groaned as she pushed them open, and the moonlight inside revealed row upon row of towering shelves. She moved carefully, fingers brushing over the spines of books that seemed to hum under her touch. Her heart beat with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Knowledge was power, she reminded herself, and tonight she would arm herself with both. Suddenly a shadow moved among the stacks. Seraphine froze, her breath catching. "Who's there?" she called softly. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Valerian. His cloak swept the floor and the pale moonlight reflected in his sharp, gray eyes. He did not look angry, not exactly. There was curiosity there and something more subtle, a flicker of intrigue that unsettled her. "You move through my castle like it is yours," he said, his voice low, almost teasing. "Do you not fear discovery?" "I fear nothing," Seraphine replied, her voice steady. "And neither should you, not from me. I have returned not to challenge you blindly, but to understand what you have hidden, and perhaps to help you." Valerian's gaze softened for a moment, though only slightly. "Help me." "You are bold, exile. I wonder, do you understand what you are asking?" "I understand enough," she said, stepping closer. "I know of the curse that shadows you. I know of the pact that grants you power yet binds you. And I know that if you continue alone, the darkness will consume more than just you." He considered her words, his fingers flexing at his sides. Pride warred with the recognition of truth. Valerian had built walls around himself, a fortress of command, fear, and unspoken regrets. Yet here she was, a woman who had once been cast out, now daring to speak to him not with fear but with knowledge. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. "After all that has been said, all that has been done, you could leave and I would never see you again, or you could betray me. Why risk yourself?" Seraphine's eyes held steady, unflinching. "Because the kingdom matters more than our past," she said softly. "Because the curse matters more than our pride. And because I believe there is a part of you that wants to be free, even if you do not admit it." He studied her for a long moment. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, yet there was an unspoken tension there, an invisible thread of longing and caution. Finally, he said, "Very well. Then we will work together, but understand this, I am no man who yields easily. You may think you guide me, but it will be I who decides how far I go and whether I trust you fully." Seraphine inclined her head, accepting the challenge. "Then we begin," she said. The two moved together through the library, pulling tomes from the shelves, reading aloud to one another. In the flickering candlelight, secrets emerged, spells of binding, ancient rituals, and the history of the Alpha Kings who had carried the same curse. With each discovery, the tension between them grew, not in anger, but in proximity, in the shared thrill of unraveling mysteries that had lain dormant for centuries. Valerian occasionally leaned close to examine a passage, his shoulder brushing hers. Each contact sent a small shock through Seraphine's chest. He noticed, though his face betrayed nothing, and yet the briefest flicker of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Neither spoke of it, but the silence carried more meaning than words ever could. Days passed as they worked in secret, moving through candle-lit halls and hidden chambers. Each revelation brought them closer, their conversations a mixture of debate, challenge, and cautious camaraderie. Seraphine found herself learning things about Valerian that no one else had seen, the weight of his responsibilities, the guilt he carried for past choices, and the rare moments when he allowed vulnerability to surface. And Valerian, in turn, saw Seraphine differently than he had ever seen any courtier, any queen, or any rival. She was clever, courageous, and unafraid. She questioned him, challenged him, and yet remained unwavering in her own convictions. He could not dismiss her, nor did he want to. She was a mirror to the parts of himself he had long hidden, the parts he feared, the parts he had almost forgotten. One evening, as the moon rose high and the wind moaned through the castle corridors, Seraphine stumbled upon a passage in a forgotten tome. Her eyes widened. "This," she whispered, voice trembling slightly, "this could undo the curse." Valerian moved closer instantly. "Show me," he said, his tone both commanding and curious. Together, they read the ancient instructions, piecing together a ritual that demanded courage, trust, and sacrifice. It was not a simple act of magic. It required confronting fears, admitting truths, and stepping into the unknown without certainty of outcome. Valerian's hand brushed against hers as they worked side by side. Neither pulled away. It was a brief, fleeting touch, but enough to ignite a storm of unspoken emotions. Pride, curiosity, and something deeper stirred within him. He was used to commanding armies, ruling a kingdom, and controlling events. Yet Seraphine stirred something he could neither command nor resist. "You have grown bold, exile," he murmured softly, almost to himself. "More than I anticipated." Seraphine looked up, eyes meeting his. "And you are slower to admit what you feel than I imagined, Alpha King," she said, a faint smile on her lips. For a moment, words failed them. The library seemed to shrink around them, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. The only sound was the soft rustle of pages and the distant wind outside. They were alone in a space filled with secrets, yet the greatest secret remained unspoken. The feelings that neither dared voice, the connection that neither could yet name. The night stretched on, and as they prepared to leave the library, Seraphine paused. She knew the knowledge they had uncovered was dangerous, powerful, and could change everything. But it also placed her in a position where trust, not force, would determine the outcome. "Valerian," she said quietly, "there is more at stake than just the curse. There are forces watching, waiting for either of us to falter. We cannot trust blindly, and yet we must trust each other, at least enough to survive." He met her gaze, and for once, the king allowed a hint of vulnerability to surface. "I have lived long enough to know that trust is a weapon as much as a shield," he admitted. "But I sense that if we do not try, the kingdom will fall, and so will we." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and the candle flames flickered wildly. The shadows seemed to twist and coil around them, as if echoing the storm of emotions that roared between the exile and the Alpha King. Both understood that the nights ahead would test not just their power, but their hearts, their pride, and the fragile trust that had begun to form between them. Seraphine stepped back, her cloak swirling around her. "We will need to move carefully," she said. "The curse does not forgive mistakes, and the forces we face will not hesitate to take advantage of weakness." Valerian nodded, his eyes dark with thought. "Then we begin tomorrow, together but cautiously. And understand this, if betrayal comes, it will be met with consequences." "I would not expect anything less," she replied. The night deepened and the castle seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it whispers of secrets yet to be revealed. Seraphine and Valerian departed the library, their shadows stretching long across the corridors, side by side yet apart in their unspoken connection. For both, the knowledge they carried was dangerous, yet intoxicating. The proximity of the other stirred feelings neither wished to name. Pride, respect, tension, and a strange longing intertwined, making the night thick with unspoken emotion. As Seraphine retreated to her chambers, she paused at the balcony. Moonlight bathed the cliffs and the castle walls. Somewhere within the shadows, she knew eyes followed her, not with hostility but with awareness. She felt the weight of destiny pressing upon her shoulders, and the quiet hope that perhaps, in facing the darkness together, she and Valerian might survive not just the curse, but the storms within themselves. Meanwhile, Valerian stood alone in the throne room, gazing out at the horizon. The wind tugged at his cloak, and the silence of the night pressed against him. Seraphine's presence lingered like a flame he could neither extinguish nor ignore. He whispered under his breath, words he did not intend to share. "She sees more than anyone ever has, and yet she walks this path willingly. Why does that draw me so?" The castle remained still, the shadows long and curling, the night waiting, as if aware that the delicate threads of fate had begun to intertwine the Alpha King and the exile. And somewhere deep within the darkness, forces beyond both of them stirred, sensing the awakening of a bond that could challenge kingdoms, curses, and even time itself. The wind carried a warning, soft yet persistent. The road ahead would be perilous. Trust would be tested. Hearts would be challenged. And by the time the sun rose, the kingdom would no longer be the same, nor would the two who walked its shadowed halls, side by side, yet bound by forces neither fully understood. And in the quiet between the shadows, the first hint of desire, danger, and destiny lingered, promising that the exile and the Alpha King had only begun to discover the depths of the bond forming between them, a bond that could either save or destroy them both. The castle slept. Under a heavy sky, clouds crawling like restless shadows. The halls were silent except for the occasional whisper of the wind through the ancient stone. Yet silence never truly existed in Valerian's realm. Secrets moved like living things here, hidden behind walls and in the spaces between the moonlit corridors. And tonight, those secrets would stir in ways neither the Alpha King nor the exile could ignore. Seraphine moved with quiet purpose, her cloak brushing the floor as she carried her lantern through the throne room. She had spent the day in the library, piecing together the final fragments of the ritual that could break the curse haunting the kingdom. Each line of the ancient text weighed heavily on her mind, demanding focus, courage, and an honesty that cut deeper than any blade. Valerian appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his silhouette sharp against the silver light of the moon. His eyes found hers, gray and unyielding, yet softened by the flicker of curiosity and something more, something unspoken. "You work too late," he said, descending the stairs with quiet grace. "The night is no place for one who carries as many secrets as you do." "I work where the answers are," Seraphine replied, her voice calm but resolute. "And the answers are here in the shadows you refuse to see." He stopped beside her, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes. "I do not refuse," he said softly. "I simply protect what must be protected. And yet I feel your presence more sharply than any danger outside these walls." Seraphine's chest tightened. She had sensed it too, a pull, a tension neither of them wanted to name, yet impossible to ignore. They were drawn together by circumstance, by destiny, and by the weight of the secrets they shared. And tonight the weight felt unbearable. "Valerian," she said quietly, stepping closer, "the curse, it is stronger than either of us imagined. It does not simply bind you, it spreads through the land, through the people, through the very air we breathe. And if it is not broken—" "You mean to say it will consume more than just the crown," he finished, his voice low, almost a growl. "I understand. And I also understand that you are the one who holds the knowledge to stop it." Seraphine looked up at him, meeting his gaze. For a brief moment, the years of exile, distrust, and isolation fell away, leaving only the raw truth between them. "I cannot do this alone," she admitted softly. "It will take both of us trust, courage, and honesty." Valerian's expression darkened, shadows crossing his face. Honesty was a weapon he had not wielded in years, and yet here it was demanded of him. "Honesty," he said almost bitterly. "Do you know what that means for a king? To lay bare the sins of the past, to admit weakness. You ask much, exile." "I ask what is necessary," Seraphine replied. "The kingdom's survival is more important than pride." He studied her for a long moment, the lines of his face hardened by years of rule, battle, and secret regrets. And yet there was a softness there now, an acknowledgement that he could not hide from her, nor from the truth. "Very well," he said finally. "We begin, but understand this: trust comes slowly and betrayal can kill." They moved to the southern wing, where the walls held the most ancient magic. The air was thick, almost tangible, with the weight of the past. Candles flickered along the corridors, casting shadows that twisted and danced like living things. Seraphine opened the book she had found, the pages worn and fragile, and began reading aloud the incantations that could reveal the source of the curse. Valerian listened carefully, his eyes never leaving her. Each word, each syllable, seemed to deepen the air between them. The ritual demanded precision, yes, but it demanded courage of a different sort, courage to face the truths they had long avoided. As they progressed, Seraphine noticed the subtle changes in Valerian. The king who had always seemed unshakable now hesitated at certain passages, his pride and fear wrestling with the knowledge being revealed. And yet, he did not retreat. He leaned closer to examine her notes, his shoulder brushing hers in the tight corridor. Each touch was electric and neither moved away. "You are patient," she said softly, not breaking the rhythm of her reading. "And you are relentless," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. Relentless and unafraid, it is unsettling yet compelling. Their eyes met, and for the first time neither looked away. The air was thick with unspoken truths, emotions that neither dared name, and the understanding that the bond forming between them was more than necessity. It was a tether of something far deeper. Hours passed, and the ritual advanced. The words in the ancient text guided them, revealing visions of the past. The first Alpha King's pact, the origins of the curse, and the sacrifices demanded of those who sought to rule without falling prey to darkness. Seraphine and Valerian followed each step, their movements precise, yet their emotions unsteady. Finally, they reached the moment where the ritual required confession, not just of truths, but of intentions, fears, and the shadows that lingered within their hearts. "You must speak," Seraphine said softly, her hand hovering over the open book. "Tell me the truth of your pact, of the choices you made. Only then can we hope to break this curse." Valerian's jaw tightened. Pride and fear warred within him, yet he understood the necessity. He took a deep breath. "I made the pact to protect the kingdom," he began, his voice steady despite the tension. "To protect it from enemies within and beyond. I gained strength, power that no ordinary man could wield, but in doing so I bound myself. The curse is my debt. It is not just my burden, but a chain that holds this kingdom in shadow." Seraphine listened, every word settling in her mind like heavy stones. She reached out, lightly touching his arm. "And yet you have carried it alone," she said softly. "You have feared sharing it, even with those who care for you, but now we face it together." Valerian's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, vulnerability replaced the armor of command. "Together," he repeated, almost to himself. "I have not known what that means in years. And yet I feel its weight differently, knowing you are beside me." The words hung between them, fragile yet powerful. For the first time, both recognized that their connection was more than circumstance. It was trust, courage, and a shared burden that neither could carry alone. But the ritual was not finished. The final steps required them to confront the darkest part of the curse, a vision that would test their fears, their desires, and the strength of their bond. Candles flickered wildly as the air grew heavy, and shadows began to twist along the walls. The room seemed to shrink, and the silence was broken only by their synchronized breaths. The vision came unbidden. Seraphine saw the kingdom consumed by darkness, Valerian's power twisted into something monstrous, and both of them powerless to stop it. She felt the despair of exile, the weight of isolation, and the fear of loss pressing in. Valerian reached for her hand. "Do not let it control you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We face this together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." Her hand closed over his, and in that moment the shadows seemed to pause. The bond between them, fragile yet unbreakable, became the anchor against the storm. Courage surged through them both, and they faced the vision with eyes wide open, hearts aligned. When the vision ended, the room was quiet once more. Candles burned steadily, and the shadows had receded. But the air remained thick with the weight of what they had seen, a reminder of the dangers ahead and the depth of trust required between them. Valerian looked at Seraphine, his expression softened yet serious. "You have changed something tonight," he said. "Not just in the ritual, but in me. I feel it, though I cannot yet name it." Seraphine nodded, her heart racing. "We have changed it together," she said, "and we must continue for the kingdom, for the curse, and for ourselves." The night outside was silent, yet alive with movement. Somewhere in the shadows, forces stirred, sensing the bond between the exile and the Alpha King. They were growing stronger, not just in power but in connection. And that strength would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. As they parted that night, Seraphine returned to her chambers, and Valerian remained in the throne room, staring at the moonlit horizon. Both were aware of the tension that lingered between them, the unspoken emotions that had emerged alongside their trust, and both knew that the days ahead would demand courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the darkness within and without. For the first time in years, Valerian allowed himself to imagine something beyond power, beyond duty, a future shaped not by fear but by choice. And somewhere deep in the castle, the echoes of destiny whispered that the Alpha King and the exile were no longer alone in the struggle against the curse. They had each other, and that bond, fragile yet fierce, was a force neither darkness nor time could ignore. And as the first light of dawn threatened to pierce the clouds, Seraphine and Valerian felt the stirrings of hope, tempered by fear, strengthened by trust, and bound by a connection that neither would fully understand, not yet. The curse was still alive, the shadows still waited, and the kingdom remained on the edge of peril. But for the first time, the Alpha King and the exile walked forward knowing they were no longer bound by fear alone. Together, they were stronger. Together, they were unstoppable. Yet the night left them with a final, haunting certainty. The greatest challenges and the deepest confessions were yet to come. The dawn broke slowly over the jagged cliffs, the first light spilling across the kingdom in shades of gold and gray. The storm that had hovered for weeks seemed to recede, leaving behind a quiet tension in the air. The kingdom waited, holding its breath, for the final act of fate that would either save it or drown it in darkness. Seraphine stood on the balcony of her chamber, her cloak fluttering lightly in the morning breeze. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. The ritual they had prepared was ready, the final confrontation with the curse, the culmination of knowledge, courage, and trust. Every shadow in the castle seemed to watch her, every stone held a whisper of the past. And at the center of it all was Valerian, the Alpha King, waiting as he always did, unyielding, commanding, and yet, beneath it all, vulnerable in ways he rarely allowed anyone to see. She descended the marble stairs to the throne room, where Valerian stood alone, gazing at the horizon. His cloak swept the floor, and the early light highlighted the sharp lines of his face. When he turned, their eyes met, and for a moment the weight of the kingdom, the curse, and the long nights of preparation fell away. They were two souls tethered by fate, bound by courage, and tempered by trust. "Are you ready?" Valerian asked, his voice low but steady. "As ready as I will ever be," Seraphine replied. Her hands brushed against the ancient book of rituals she carried, and she felt the power it held. But the true strength was not in the pages or the words. It was in their unity, the bond that had grown between them through nights of discovery, tension, and unspoken longing. The throne room seemed to pulse with energy as they began. Candles flickered, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Seraphine read the incantations aloud, her voice steady and clear. Valerian repeated the words with her, his tone blending with hers in a rhythm that felt both natural and eternal. As the ritual progressed, the castle itself seemed to respond. The air grew thick, almost alive, and the shadows began to twist and swirl. Figures from the past, memories of kings and queens, flickered at the edges of vision, as if the very spirits of the realm were watching, waiting. "You hold more power than you realize," Seraphine said softly, her eyes on Valerian. "But you must let it flow, not control it." Valerian's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, the king who had always been unshakable allowed vulnerability to show. "And you," he said, "hold more courage than anyone I have ever known. We will succeed because we face this together." The ritual demanded a final act, a willingness to surrender pride and fear, a readiness to admit truth and embrace the unknown. Seraphine stepped forward, raising her hands, and Valerian mirrored her, their movements synchronized in perfect harmony. Light began to radiate from the book, spreading outward in waves that shimmered against the walls and floors. The vision of the curse appeared, more vivid than before, darkness spreading over the kingdom, shadows consuming all in their path, and Valerian's power twisted into something monstrous. But this time, they faced it not with fear but with unity. Seraphine's hands gripped his, and the bond between them shone brighter than the shadows. "You are not alone," she whispered. "We face it together." The darkness recoiled as if wounded, the shadows dissipating in the strength of their combined courage. Valerian's voice rose, firm and commanding, yet tinged with emotion. "I will no longer hide from what I am, nor from what I must do. This kingdom, its people, they will not fall, not while we stand together." The room shook as the curse fought back, but the unity between exile and king held firm. Every fear, every hesitation, every secret they had shared became a shield, and the shadows that had lingered for centuries were drawn back into the void from which they had come. When the light finally faded, the castle was silent. The candles burned steady, and the first rays of the sun pierced the windows, illuminating the throne room in a golden glow. The curse was broken. Seraphine and Valerian stood together, breathing heavily, their hands still clasped. For a moment, words failed them. The enormity of what they had accomplished pressed upon them, and yet it was not only victory they felt. It was relief, trust, and the first stirrings of something far more fragile and precious. Valerian finally spoke, his voice soft, yet full of awe. "You have changed everything, Seraphine. The kingdom, the curse, even me. I'm no longer bound by fear, and I owe that to you." Seraphine smiled, a quiet, radiant expression. "We did this together," she said, "and we will continue to protect what we have saved together." They descended to the great hall, where the people of the kingdom had gathered, sensing the shift in power and presence. For years, they had lived under fear and shadow, and now, hope shimmered in their eyes. Seraphine and Valerian entered side by side, no longer ruler and exile, but equals, partners in both struggle and triumph. The courtiers murmured in awe, seeing the king who had seemed untouchable now walk beside the woman who had once been cast out. Whispers of respect, wonder, and even admiration spread through the hall. The bond between them was visible, not just in gestures, but in the quiet confidence they held together, in the energy that radiated from their unity. Valerian raised his hand, calling for silence. "This kingdom has faced darkness for too long," he said, his voice strong and commanding. "It has survived because courage does not reside in a crown alone, but in those willing to face fear, admit truth, and trust one another. Today the curse is ended, and we begin anew, stronger, wiser, and united." The people erupted in cheers, but Seraphine and Valerian shared a quiet glance, acknowledging that the real victory was not in applause, but in the bond they had forged. They had faced shadows, confronted fears, and discovered a connection that went beyond duty, pride, or obligation. It was trust, respect, and the first hint of love, tempered by trials and strengthened by challenge. Later, as the sun rose higher and the kingdom began to breathe freely for the first time in generations, Valerian led Seraphine to the highest balcony of the palace. The wind carried a gentle warmth, and the world seemed still, as if honoring their triumph. "You have given me more than freedom from the curse," he said quietly, taking her hands in his. "You have given me the courage to see myself clearly and to face the future without fear." Seraphine's eyes softened. "And you have given me trust, Valerian." Trust that the past does not define us, that the choices we make together can shape something greater, and perhaps something more. Valerian's gaze lingered on hers, gray eyes meeting green, unflinching. Something more, he repeated, a quiet promise in his tone. For a long moment they stood together, the kingdom stretching out below them, bathed in light. The cliffs, the seas, the forests, all seemed to hum with a renewed energy. They had faced curses, confronted shadows, and walked through fire together. And now, as they held hands and felt the bond between them solidify, they knew the kingdom and their hearts were stronger for it. But even in victory, they were aware that the world remained vast and unpredictable. There would always be challenges, storms, and shadows to face. Yet this time they would not face them alone. They had each other, and in that unity they carried a power stronger than any curse or threat. Valerian finally spoke, a smile touching his lips for the first time in years. "The kingdom is ours to protect, and the future ours to shape." Seraphine nodded, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Then let us begin together." And so, standing on the balcony with the wind in their hair, the sun warming their faces, they looked out over the kingdom, no longer as king and exile, but as partners, equals, and something far greater than either had imagined. Their hearts, once bound by shadow and challenge, now beat together with courage, trust, and the quiet promise of a bond that would endure beyond curses, beyond fear, and beyond time itself. The kingdom had been saved. The curse had been broken. And in the silence of that early morning, the Alpha King and the exile shared a connection forged in shadows, strengthened by trials and tempered by love, a love unspoken, yet undeniable, and powerful enough to shape the future of all who dwelled in their world. The light spread further across the cliffs, touching the seas, the forests, and the cities below. It was a new dawn, a new era, and a new beginning for the kingdom, for the Alpha King, and for the woman who had walked into darkness and emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. And somewhere in the distance, the wind whispered across the land, carrying a quiet truth. Shadows may return, storms may rise, but the bond between the Alpha King and the exile would endure, fierce, unbroken, and eternal.